Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today, Kevin O'Connor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm thrilled to have you, and I'm glad we finally got you into the studio because we've spent the past many minutes trying to figure out what kind of demons were haunting this episode and not allowing you into the studio.
Whatever we've kept, that was our collective tenacity and that we worked to add.
That's exactly it. Persistence and tenacity. It always overcomes. Let's jump into the episode now that we're both here, with starting with the question of what were the values and beliefs that you were raised with as a child that contributed to you becoming who you are. And I'm so interested because you had a very, I would say, uncommon childhood.
Yeah, I did. And the values that were part of that childhood were just, I think, part of one word that comes to mind is a spirit of inclusivity, and just in the way that I had modeled from my parents. They were very social people and had a wide range of friends and from different aspects of their lives. Sometimes they brought those people together. Sometimes they just interchanged with themselves. They had their card playing friends, their dancing friends, their fishing friends, their travel friends, and a lot of those groups interchanged. So I guess part of that value I got from that was just a sense of fluidity in terms of being able to socially interchange readily. And I saw that from both of them, and I was in their presence oftentimes. So that would be, one value, just the idea, I guess I might call it adaptability. I might call it sociability, personability, a lot of abilities there. So that's three that come to mind in terms of what was modeled to me as a child from my parents when they were raising me in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And obviously I know what your childhood was and how you were, what the environment you were raised in, but my listeners don't know yet. So share with us what, the family business.
Sure. The family business was a funeral home. And my uncle had founded this funeral home in his late 20s in 1930. He moved to a town that he hadn't been familiar with, but knew there was a prospect for him to reach some success being a funeral director, which he wanted to do and have his own business. He took my father with him, who at the time was 16. They moved, when I say with him, they moved from Hammond, Indiana to Elgin, Illinois, which is about 60 miles. But in 1930, there was no interstate. There was U.S. Route 20, which is how they traveled. But they got there and they went to this new town of Elgin, and Uncle Lawrence, along with my dad, his brother, and their parents, and my Uncle Lawrence's bride of about 4 or 5 days, they moved to go to Elgin to start this business in a house they had rented. So I came along a few years later, about 11 years later, after my dad had met my mom and all that goes on. And my dad then had joined his brother in the business, and I was brought home to the place where the funeral home had been established then for just a couple of years because they had moved. And that was it, in an old Victorian house. I don't know if we have video here, but I can show you the picture there.
Yeah.
That's the picture of the house there.
Right.
And it's still there.
What Kevin's showing for people who are listening to the audio is the cover of his book called Two Floors Above. And we'll get to that a little bit more. But yeah, that's cool. So yeah. I have the question as you were talking that came to my mind is, did your uncle, had he worked in this industry before? What made him think, or what inspired him to become a funeral director? Because that's it seems kind of random.
Yeah, it does seem kind of random. And I tell that story in the book. He was, as a high school kid, maybe a little older, in that, late teens, 20. He worked for a funeral home in Hammond, and that was called the Burns Funeral Home. It's still there. It's still there in Hammond, Indiana. And he worked for them and then got intrigued with doing that as an occupation. As he went to mortuary school at a school called Worsham, which was in Chicago. Now it's outside in the suburbs, but is still over 100 years old, the School of Mortuary Science. And he went there, got his education, and then met his soon-to-be wife and explained to her that he really wanted to be a business owner and he liked this field. At the time, the funeral industry was changing. A lot of times funerals then were in the people's homes. And so his experiences with working at the Burns Funeral Home had been to work with families in their own home environments. But then in the industry itself, there was starting to become a transition where the funerals would be held in I'd say a neutral spot, so that the grieving families weren't having to have that grief in their own home. So Lawrence, that was his name, Uncle Lawrence, came on board as the industry was changing. And Burns was one of those people who not only had families in their own homes, but also had established a place where people could go. So that was the environment that Lawrence was exposed to. But when he went out to start his own business, or had this spirit in his head that he wanted to do this, there really wasn't a place. We're talking 1929, 1930.
Yeah.
Lots going on there with the national economy, depression, and there didn't seem to be a need for the business in the area, and he didn't want to compete, set up something and compete with the people that had given him so much footing. So he heard the news about this town in Elgin that had lost 2 funeral directors and needed somebody that would especially appeal to a Catholic community, and then a Catholic Irish community. So that's when he pursued the idea of moving to Elgin, and went and explored a piece of property. Didn't even tell my aunt that he was doing it. They still hadn't married. And in the process of putting their wedding together, he said, "This is what we're going to do."
Wow.
And
So he was quite a
she went
visionary.
along. She went along with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right. Good for her, I guess. So he was quite a visionary. Now, so you grew up in this industry. Are you an only child?
No. I have a brother that was born in 1940. I was born in 1950, and I have another brother that was born in 51. But in addition, so I have my 2 brothers. But in the establishment in this Victorian house, on the second floor of the house, was where my 3 cousins and my aunt and uncle lived. They were 3 daughters. They were a little older than me, anywhere from 14 to 19 years older than me. So that was another family that lived in the house. So our 2 families together, which also makes us unique, had this shared living experience, because the way that the house was structured, in order for me to get to the 3rd floor apartment where my family lived, it had been a ballroom in the original house that my parents converted into their living area. But in order for me to get there, I walked through the apartment of my aunt and uncle and my cousins. So there was always an interchange, always a presence of other family. Good news is we always got along. There was never any tension. And part of what I convey in the book is 2 families working together to maintain this business. My dad and my uncle and their 2 wives, and the roles that each of us kids played over the years, and my cousins and I, and my brothers and I. So that's how we worked.
Cool. So I want to get it more into your story.
Sure.
And did you follow, who went into the family business? Because you didn't go into it, did you?
None of the offspring did.
Really?
My
None
3
of them.
cousins
Wow.
didn't. Well, the difference for them, they were coming of age in the 1950s. They were born in the 30s. My 3 female daughters, or cousins, female cousins, and there really wasn't a place for women in the industry at that time. I guess that's true of other industries as well. But the reverse of that is now, I think it's more than 50% of funeral directors are female.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
in the
interesting.
1940s and 50s and 60s, there really wasn't a space. So I don't think it was even on their agenda to even consider it.
Why didn't you go into it?
Thanks.
And what did
me.
you do instead?
Thank you. My dad was always open to the idea. I chose education, and I chose that because I was always interested in teaching. I was interested even though I was an undergrad poli-sci major, I took a number of education courses, and that became something that I really wanted to do as I got into graduate school. Thanks. So, and my parents, my dad and my mom, my aunt, and my uncle, with all of this, I guess I gave you the reasons that the three daughters probably didn't get involved. But in terms of my brothers and I, it would have been a little more conducive. But they never said, "Hey, you've got to." We've built this business up. They never put any kind of pressure on us to say you have to do this. We've spent too many years putting this together, and how can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
So they let us all explore. So I chose education, and as I went to school and got my teaching certificate, became a principal, a college educator, curriculum writer. So that's what I did for my career. And I talk a little bit in the book about just there's a lot of parallels between being an educator and being a funeral director in terms of the concepts of servitude, interest and work in community, caring for families, caring for individuals, experiencing a lot of, having a lot of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and I picked that up from Dad and my uncle, and transferred that unconsciously, I think, at the time.
Sure.
But it was just a natural fit for me. And I guess part of going back to your question, whereas in the funeral industry, as it is in other family type oriented businesses, or a lot of times kids follow in the footsteps of their parents. And it wasn't anything that I couldn't have considered, or they wouldn't have welcomed me,
Mm-hmm.
but they always just said, you choose your own path. And with that kind of freedom, that's what I did.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. It's really nice that they gave you the freedom to do that, because other family businesses, you hear people go into it because they feel like they're obligated to do it, and even if it's not what their heart is calling them to do. And so it's interesting that you were able to follow that
pressure. Never felt the pressure. But I mean, I worked a lot in the funeral home as a teenager and a 20-something person. And even after I did my education career and started, some summers I spent helping out and doing what I could at the funeral home. Mm-hmm. So it was never anything that was foreign to me, or that I couldn't do it or wouldn't do it. It was just that idea that I could choose my own path.
Yeah. And so then at what point, because the show is called Fine is a 4-letter word, at some point in your life, you were in a place where you were either telling people everything was fine or nobody was asking, but you felt like people expected that everything was fine, but in your heart it wasn't.
Right. And I guess the idea that I came out as a 55-year-old man as gay, but I had known that for many years. I didn't know what to call it in 1950.
Yeah.
We had different names for it, and it was certainly secretive at the time. I was just a teenager, then a college kid, and I married twice, had children, and went and had an education career. I was a teacher in the Bay Area of San Francisco in 1975 to around that time, the years that Harvey Milk was doing his work to help ensure that gay teachers could be employed. And here I was, a teacher, married at the time, and thinking, this isn't right that we even have to do this. And yet at that time, I just didn't put myself in a place to come out at that time. Mm-hmm. So I guess that everything's fine. Everything's fine, because I think it was fine because I was successful in my career. I kept experiencing, whether I was doing it in California or later when we moved to Illinois. I was very content and liked my career, but there was still this, I call it a pit in my stomach. There was just a part of me that didn't get out. Mm-hmm, and so everything's fine. Yeah, but I really don't know how to tell people that I have an attraction to men. So that was a difficult part.
Did your wives know?
Well, that's part of the story too. My first wife, I was able to talk to her about it in the '70s, and she was very helpful. She and I have renewed our friendship the last 15 years, and are very good friends. But she made it comfortable enough for me at the time in the mid '70s, yeah,
Hmm.
to start to talk about it, and so it became a little more acceptable, at least in my own head. But when she and I decided to separate, I um, kept pursuing other relationships because in my mind, I really wanted to be a father. I wanted to
Hmm.
be a parent, and in my I didn't see that as a possibility as a gay man in the 1970s to do that.
Hmm.
Others, there's a few others who did, even at that time. Of course, it's much more acceptable now than it used to be.
Right.
So that was another point where it's, I'm fine, but I'm going to pursue this, and um, I was comfortable in mixed settings. So I was
Yeah.
comfortable
Yeah.
dating again. I met my second wife, and we married, had children, and two sons, and then it wasn't until my 17-year-old son started to exhibit that he was coming out. That's when I had to confront that. Yeah, I feel fine, and I wasn't feeling fine because here I'm trying to listen to, invite conversation with my son, who I suspected was coming out, and I wasn't being authentic myself.
Mm.
So I often tell people that my son and I came out at the same time.
I know this is going to be a really hard question to answer because it's totally hypothetical, but if your son hadn't been coming out, do you think you still would have done it?
Oh boy, I've had a lot of interviews. That's the first time that everybody that you're yeah, classic question. Um, and it is hypothetical. I
Right.
really think with the way things have turned out the last 20 years, I probably, even without having him do that, have his own expression to come out, I would have reached a point or some sort of a breaking point, some
Hmm.
sort of a spot where I couldn't have held it in any longer. Certainly, I'm grateful to him and his situation because it put me in a position to say, okay, what am I going to do with this? How am
Yeah.
I really going to be fine?
Right. Right.
How can I say I'm fine more truthfully? And
Hmm.
it was navigating that for myself that helped me get to a different spot in my life.
Right. Because how could you encourage him to be his true self if you weren't being your true self?
Oh, that hit the nail on the head. Yeah. And having, even in my closetedness, I was aware of different ways people were coming out. I had done my share. There's never enough reading I could do, but I knew of other people's stories. I had met people in my life who had come out. I knew people that were comfortable in their life setting as out and gay, and yet here I was, sort
Hmm.
of concealing this and not being true to myself. I just, as I often did in my lifetime, I went to counselors, and as I went from counselor to counselor, I was able to just keep talking about it more and more, and help myself understand it, let alone other people. So.
I find it interesting that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that one of the values that was instilled in you as a child through your family was this acceptance and you know feeling comfortable in different situations and around
Mm-hmm,
different people
mm-hmm,
and the
mm-hmm,
diversity,
mm-hmm.
and yet you were still not comfortable.
Mm-mm. No, not, it's interesting. When I was talking about at the beginning of the interview today, I thought, and when the first word that came up to me when you asked was that concept of inclusivity, which is a word I
Hmm.
never used in the 50s and 60s. I've become certainly more aware of that because I've worked the last 15, 20 years of my life with LGBT advocacy. So, but when I look back at my family life, uh, I think it was from that circle of friends that my parents had, and I don't think there was anybody that they never. I guess part of what I say inclusive is this wide circle of friends. I don't recall them ever speaking disparagingly of people, unless
Mhm.
somebody had done something wrong to them.
Yeah.
But in their circle of friends, they had women friends that lived together. They didn't, they didn't call it then.
Mhm.
Dad had friends that were in town that probably, if we look back through a different lens, there might have been some things, that were unspoken.
Mhm.
The other thing I talk about in the book is in 1979, when I was 29, my dad was he was alive. He was about 5 years prior to his death. I engaged him in a conversation about coming out. I told him about an encounter I had 10 years prior when I was in college. So, and when I was able to develop, I guess, the courage or the wherewithal to have this conversation with my father, it was a wall that was torn down for me,
Mm.
because he just accepted it.
What a
And I guess
gift.
any fear that I had, even as inclusive as I had perceived him, um, the idea that I was wanting to tell him that I had an attraction to men was still fearful for me.
Sure.
And because not having ever had the discussion with him before, but then having, as I say in the book, when he started to explain, oh, I've known other people in my life, and he pointed out to me at the time, which I've heard since, that there's a continuum of gender identity, of sexuality, and again, the terminology in 1979 would be much different than now, but that's what he was saying to me in a way to support me. And when I was able to tell him about the encounter I had in college, he knew the person I was talking about, and he was very understanding, and so that was one. I talk about my coming out in the book a little bit, but also in presentations and when I'm talking to other people with advocacy issues. Yeah, I kept putting different toes out from that closed door, that closet door,
Mhm.
and that was one of my steps, was that conversation I had with my dad when I was 29. So
What a gift that you were, one, able to find the courage to have the conversation with him, and then
mm-hmm.
the way he accepted and kind of um managed that conversation with you, and again, like, just proving what you said at the beginning about his ability to be so inclusive
Yeah,
and
and
accepting of everybody, in no matter who they were and how they showed up.
that's it. And then in those 5 years prior to his death, not only did I was I became separated and divorced from my first wife. I remarried, had 2 kids, all of which he was a part of.
Oh, wow, nice.
And yet we never, we never built on that conversation we had in 1979.
Uh-huh.
So there was something that we knew about each other, but he just supported me and watched me and observed me, but more than observed, he was there to help me,
Mhm.
to help me learn how to be a dad. And, and so it was always there, but it was never brought up. Even when I was thinking, when I went ahead with the second marriage, he didn't say to me, I don't know, well, he never said, you really think you should be doing this? Or anything
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
He just was supportive. And I guess that was the way that I think maybe his way of thinking was, people come in all different combinations.
Mhm.
And people come with all kinds of different aspects to their personality. And I think that was one of the things that he knew about himself, and how he treated other people, and that's how he treated me
Mhm.
as well. So I think that's part of what he was all about, and part of the story that I convey a little bit in the book. Not only did he do that with me, he did that with other people and all his clients and his family. And that's part
Yeah.
of the story of the environment we grew up in.
Which speaks to why they were so successful.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Um, they were successful, and the bills, even though they sold the business in '84, my dad was terminally ill at that time, and they sold it, and the business is still existing. It's been through a series of owners over the last 40 years, but it's still in the same house, still got the O'Connor name on the front, and in 6 more years, it will have been 100 years in the town. So I think
Wow.
that kind of longevity is pretty important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you came out with your son, you were still married.
Yes, still
And
married
so
to his mom.
I imagine that kind of fractured things in that relationship.
Yeah, that was I guess that would be another book that I could write. Um, no, it was just I was when he was I was going to a counselor at the time, and through that work that I was doing with her, and in tandem working with my son, who was at a 16, 17-year-old, wondering what to do, me wondering what to do, and then eventually my wife becoming included in the conversation, and then I can't remember what happened first. I remember she did say to me once she agreed to go to counseling with me,
Mhm.
um, and because I had been going for a while, and I had left the house for a while, and because I needed another kind of space, and she
Yeah.
said, if you move back home for a while, I'll go to counseling with you. And we did that. And then we unpacked things together, and then finally reached an agreement that being married wasn't probably the best thing
Mhm.
at the time.
Mhm.
And so in that, so as I was doing that, my son was making his own explorations. He was then in his early 20s. So just to be there for him if I could, and in the midst of the separation and the divorce. So that was going on. So I was able to talk to my wife about it. Both wives, I was able to
Mhm.
talk to them
Mhm.
about it, and just was able even a month ago to visit the mother of my 2 children, and spend some time with her. So
Yeah.
yeah.
How did your other son take all of this news? Because that's a lot to
Hmm.
manage through. I mean, for everybody, but like he was kind of on the outside of all of the dynamics happening here.
Yeah, yeah. I made a conscious decision not to tell either one of the boys about the decision I made to come out until after the divorce was final.
Mm.
So they knew that they were going through the experience of the divorce, and this through some conversations I had with my mom, who was helping me through this process. The mother is still helping a 50-something-year-old
You know,
navigate life.
kids never stop needing their mothers. I've had this
Yeah, I
conversation with
know.
my friends who have young adult children. I don't have any children, um, but sometimes it's heartwarming for them when they call and they're like, I still need help with this, or like, could you help me
Yeah.
with this? And I'm like, yeah, they never stop. We
No, and
always
I
need our
see that.
moms,
Yeah,
right?
and I was in my 50s when I
Yeah.
said to her, when I came and told her about the decision to get divorced, and also that I was gay, and I had a few years left in my professional contract as a principal at the time, and partly what she said was, I think it's probably in your interest not to come out right now. And anyway, because we lived in an area where people knew each other, and
Hmm.
her counsel at the time was, let's let the family get used to the idea of being divorced and
Mm,
separation. That's always hard to wrap a family's hands around, no matter who the people are.
mm,
So we did that, and then so I made a decision then, just to go through the tension and the anxiety of the divorce itself, and then shortly after the divorce was legal, then I purposefully sat down each one of the boys individually.
hmm.
So and it's been that whole aspect of our lives, me being gay, um, has gone has gone well. So
How has were there other tools that you used in addition to counseling to help you feel more comfortable in your authentic self?
Other tools?
Yeah.
Well, other tools was once, especially once the divorce was final, and I was able to, in the midst of the divorce, I was able to talk to people. So having that conversation with my dad at age 29, and having more conversations with my mom in my 50s, and then having had a circle of friends, one at a time, who I was able to come out to,
Mm-hmm.
some professional friends, some personal friends. Each conversation I had made it a little bit easier
Mm-hmm.
and made it
Mm-hmm.
more comfortable. And people weren't slamming a door on me. People weren't saying, "Hey, if I'd known this, I would never be friends with it." Nobody ever said that.
Were
And
you afraid that was going to happen before you told them?
yeah, there was a fear there. There
Mm.
was a fear. Yeah, I guess, and as I get to know and do more advocacy and share stories with people, there is that fear there that if I think it's pretty common,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're an 11-year-old coming out, or a 9-year-old, or a 67-year-old coming out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just that
Absolutely.
idea. It's a fear.
Yeah.
It's a fear of, how am I going to be accepted? What are people going to think? And it's something that, in this month of Pride, people say, why do we have a Pride month? Why don't, and I partly, well, we don't have a straight month because people don't have to do
Yeah.
what people who identify as gay have to do.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to come to grips with their identity. It's just not nobody ever says to you, are you, very rarely does a person get a question, are you straight?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's never, it rarely comes out to that. So I don't know if that I diverged a little bit from your question, I think.
Yeah. No, it's because you're right. Like, people don't have to be vulnerable to be straight,
Mm-mm.
yet to be gay or not straight, you have to be more vulnerable, it seems like.
Yeah, and I wrote another. I was an author in a book called Journey Out. And it was an anthology of 20 stories of individuals who had journeyed out of their marriage. And when I wrote that chapter, this is 10, 12 years ago, I quoted Barney Frank, who used to be
Mm-hmm.
a U.S. congressman. And in one of his writings, in a book that he did with Mitchell Gold, he just said, it'll be a great day when this word coming out isn't even a factor in our
Mm-hmm.
society. Why should anybody have to come out? Why can't you just be?
Right.
And so I've looked at the whole term of coming out in a different way. As I reframe it with myself and from other people. Instead of saying coming out, let's say you're going to
Yeah.
instead.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a different way to look at the traveling.
Yeah.
So you're going to something, and so I was going, and then continue to go to my authenticity, go to my true self, my whole self, and that's who I present now as. I don't enter a room or enter a group thinking that, gee, I have to mention this. I just come in as Kevin O'Connor, and certainly it's going to come up in conversation, but I don't have to have a G on my forehead
Yeah. Yeah.
and said, yeah. So that.
Yeah. Very cool. What is on, like, what are you looking forward to in your life now?
Okay, I'm looking forward to continuing with this journey that the book has taken me on. I was 50 years an educator, so I'm still doing some work in education and advocacy when I can. The book is taken, so what I'm looking forward to is more journeys with the book. I'm learning so much about book marketing and self-publishing, and that's a whole nother venue for me. Although it's not unlike, it's just like I made a transition from being a funeral home kid to being a teacher to being a principal, now to being an author and a book marketer. Um, there's a lot of similarities in marketing a book as being a school principal, I think. And so I'm looking forward, as I continue to be involved, of doing more of that and just making presentations and continuing to take the book on the road, whether it's through venues like what you and I are doing today, or going to bookstores, doing personal venues. I've been doing that as well, as much as I can. And so that's what I look forward to. I'm looking forward to working on the second and third books. So I've got notes around my room here of the startings, of the beginnings of the next in the series here. So I'm doing that as well. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to continued relationships with my 7 grandchildren, 7 granddaughters, and my sons, and the things that I do as a grandfather and as a father. That's always something to look forward to, and there's a lot of joy and doing that. And I look forward to this being continually not have to. I just don't have the worries or the pit in my stomach that I had and that I had for so long,
Yeah.
trying to cover up or hide something, and I don't have to do that anymore. And
That's
I look
such a
forward to doing that
beautiful,
some more. Yeah.
yeah, beautiful place to be.
Yeah. It's a
Well,
great place.
we cannot end this conversation without my asking of
Uh-huh.
what is the song that you listen to when you need an extra boost of energy?
Okay. And when I can't, I love a number of songs, but one of the songs that comes to mind in terms of energy and is the Stevie Wonder song, "You Are the Sunshine of My Life."
Mm,
Um, I'll always be around. I'll always be there for you. And a vision I have of that song was in 1973, Easter Sunday, beautiful day in San Francisco. And it came out. Well, that's all we had then was car radios. We didn't have
right, right.
tapes and CDs. And that was my first year out of college, and I was living in San Francisco, and driving up and down the hills of San Francisco on this beautiful day, seeing the bay out there, and Stevie Wonder's song being on this. And in my 23-year-old self, I turned it full blast because I was alone in the car.
Mm-hmm.
But that song is always, I think probably that was the prime of that song at the time. It was on radio. It was probably a key
Yeah,
song of the
right,
73.
right. In
So,
the top 40.
yeah, probably. But that song has always resonated for me with not only the beat and the music and the energy, but the lyrics as well.
Mm.
And whether I hear a cover of that song in a Stevie Wonder style, or even if they do it down tempo and they make it into a ballad, it's just something that always resonates with me with the song itself and the beat and the lyrics, and it's just a good song for me, a good energy song.
Very nice. And lastly, if someone wants to get in touch with you to continue this conversation, where's the best place for them to do that?
Thanks, Lori, for asking. I'm going to give you a few bits of information to include here in the recording, or put in the show
just
notes.
say, yeah, I was going to say, I'll put all this in the show notes as well.
Sure. Well, the website that I use is KevinO'ConnorAuthor.com, and O'Connor is OR, so it's KevinO'ConnorAuthor.com. And then the other thing that people can reach me at my personal email, which is KOCO7351 at gmail.com. And I'm open to texting at 815-546-1076. The website, you'll be included on the website because I keep a list of all the media that I've been on. So I'm up to about 20 some different podcasts. So anybody can go to my website and go to the media section, and then all the other podcasts I've been on, they can access those too. So that's another good source. And then on Instagram, my moniker on Instagram is called The Grief Navigator. And that's something that I've been working on with some other colleagues, helping people find other resources as they experience their own grief. There are so many resources on the internet. Unlike when my father and uncle first were in this profession where grief was unspoken, grief was handled in the days surrounding the funeral, but it was then you move on.
Right,
Get on with
right,
your life.
right. Suck it up and move on.
Suck it up. Now it's such a more healthy atmosphere. Doesn't mean it's any easier to cope with grief, but the resources are there. So part of what I do with the Grief Navigator on Instagram and then transfers over to Facebook and other social media, LinkedIn as well, is to let people know of other resources I've discovered to help them find a way to navigate their grief. Things. So that's it.
That is that's cool. And you're just reminding me, I would love to introduce you to Carol Bannons, who was a guest, I think, on season 1.
Oh,
And
yeah?
she talked about managing grief and helping other people manage grief as well. And so you two will probably be good
Put us
connections to
together.
each other.
Put
So
us together.
I
Yeah.
will, and I'll put a link to her episode in the show notes as well.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you
Wonderful.
so much for joining me today, Kevin. On fine is a 4-letter word.
Okay, I appreciate the time we've spent together, and I'm going to keep that word fine in my mind. That's for sure.